When people talk about classic American cars, there's always one model that slips into the conversation almost automatically, as if it has the right to be there no matter what era you're discussing. And that is the 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback. What makes this car fascinating is that it wasn't simply another yearly update or another cosmetic refresh. It arrived at a peculiar moment in automotive history, when the Mustang had already taken the world by storm, but was starting to feel pressure from every corner. Ford had created the pony car segment almost by accident back in 1964, and the demand was so intense that dealers were marking up prices and customers were fighting over inventory. But by 1966, Chevrolet rolled out the Camaro, Pontiac answered with the Firebird, Dodge pushed the Charger, and suddenly the Mustang wasn't the only young star in town. Ford realized they needed something bigger, stronger, more dramatic, something that would make a Camaro look like it was trying too hard. And so, in 1967, the Mustang gained a little weight, widened its shoulders, deepened its stance, and stepped into a new era with a design that looked like it didn't just want attention, it demanded it. What immediately sets the 67 Fastback apart is its silhouette. The roofline doesn't simply slope, it sweeps, almost like a single uninterrupted motion from the windshield down to the tail. It feels cinematic, even if you're just looking at one parked on a driveway. Ford didn't know it at the time, but that shape would go on to define what most people picture in their minds when they imagine a classic Mustang. The Fastback wasn't just another body style. It was the one that carried a certain mood, a sense of speed even when the car wasn't moving, the impression that the thing was built to run. And unlike the earlier Mustangs, which had a playful, lightweight charm, the 1967 model finally looked like it could fight back in the escalating horsepower wars. You can almost sense the cultural tension of the time just by staring at its fenders. America wanted bigger engines, louder exhausts, more thrill, and Ford responded by making a car that could finally swallow a big block V8 without looking like it was about to burst at the seams. And that big block option, the 390 cubic inch, 6.4-liter FEV8, changed everything. Before 1967, Mustangs were sporty, yes, but they weren't intimidating. They were fun. They were approachable. But drop that 390 into the Fastback chassis, and suddenly you had a machine that rumbled with a low, threatening growl and could push the driver back into the seat with real, physical force. It wasn't perfect. Too much weight up front, brakes that could feel overwhelmed. Handling that was more enthusiasm than precision, but none of that mattered. People weren't buying the 67 Fastback for surgical handling. They were buying it because it felt alive in a way modern cars rarely do. Even the standard engines, like the 289 V8 in its various versions, had a kind of mechanical honesty to them. They needed to be driven, not managed. There were no electronic aids, no hidden safety nets. When you pressed the accelerator, it was metal linking to metal, and the reaction felt immediate and raw. Inside, it still offered that familiar Mustang charm. The dual cowl dashboard that looked like twin wings, the optional wood grain or brushed aluminum trim that tried to make the cabin feel more luxurious than the price tag suggested, and that clever fold-down rear seat in the Fastback that created a surprisingly large flat cargo area. It wasn't just stylish, it was practical in a uniquely 1960s way. When practical meant you can throw your gear back there and go on a weekend road trip without thinking about it twice. Even the safety features, which were primitive by today's standards, marked a shift toward a more mature Mustang. Steering wheels were designed to absorb impacts, padding was added where it counted, and Ford started to hint that the Mustang wasn't only for the young and reckless. It was becoming a car that families, professionals, and older drivers could appreciate without giving up the thrill. But beneath all of this, beneath the styling, the engines, the interior, is something less tangible but far more important. The 1967 Mustang Fastback has a personality. It has presence. When you stand next to one, you don't feel like you're looking at a machine. You feel like you're looking at a character with its own history. Maybe it's because so many films later used Mustangs of this exact shape, even if not the same year, turning that Fastback roofline into a symbol of rebellion, coolness, and escape. Or maybe it's because this was the moment when the Mustang stopped being a novelty and became a cultural pillar, something that didn't belong to Ford anymore, but to the world. And before we even get into the deeper technical details, the GT package, the transmissions, the driving experience, the collector obsession, or the ripple effect that the 67 had on future Mustangs, it's clear that this model carries an energy that no amount of specifications can capture. The story isn't finished, not even close, but this is where it becomes obvious that the 1967 Fastback didn't simply evolve from the earlier Mustangs. It reinvented what the Mustang was allowed to be. And once you start looking past that first emotional impression and into the mechanical heart of the 1967 Mustang Fastback, the story only gets richer. Ford didn't simply give the car a stronger presence. They engineered it to back up the attitude. The range of engines available that year almost feels like a menu designed for every type of driver. On the modest end, you had the inline-six, which was reliable, smooth, and perfect for someone who wanted the look without the wildness. But the real identity of the 67 Mustang lived in its V8 lineup, especially the 289 and the now famous 390. The 289 came in several configurations, from an easygoing two-barrel to the lively high-po K-code, which revved eagerly and felt nimble in a way that modern engines, for all their sophistication, rarely replicate. It had personality in every vibration, every hesitation, every mechanical click. Then there was the 390, the engine that transformed the car from something spirited into something formidable. Drop that massive iron block under the hood and suddenly the Mustang wasn't just a sporty coupe anymore. It was a full-fledged muscle car. The hood looked longer, the front end heavier, the exhaust note deeper. There's a reason people still chase those big block versions even when the smaller engines are objectively better balanced. There's an aura around the 390 that you only understand when you hear it wake up for the first time, rumbling like something alive. But a car is more than an engine, and the 67 Fastback proves it. Ford widened the body slightly to create room for these power plants, and that change altered the whole driving experience. The suspension had to evolve too, with stronger springs and new geometry meant to keep the car manageable despite the extra weight. It's not refined in the modern sense. Steering is heavier, brakes require real commitment, and the car moves with a kind of enthusiastic looseness that reminds you constantly that you're in control, not the electronics. But that's exactly why people fall in love with it. The feedback is unfiltered. The sensation's honest. You feel the front tires bite when you turn the wheel. You sense the rear end squat when you accelerate. And when the big V8 sends a surge of torque through the drivetrain, it's like getting a message directly from the car's soul. Even the imperfections become part of the charm. This is a machine that asks to be driven with intention, not simply operated. Collectors also fixate on the details that make the 67 unique. The side scoops, more pronounced than in earlier years, give the car a sculpted, muscular quality. The larger grille, slightly more aggressive headlights, and concave taillights all contribute to a look that stands halfway between the clean innocence of the early Mustangs and the raw brutality of the early 70s models. And then there's the GT package, which didn't just add fog lights and stripes, it sharpened the car's identity. Fog lights centered in the grille create that unmistakable front stare, like the car is sizing you up. Quad exhaust tips underline the growl with a metallic edge. Even the badges, simple as they are, feel like they belong to a higher tier of Mustang mythology. Inside, the experience evolves too. The fold-down rear seat is one of those clever touches that people don't expect from a 1960s muscle car. It transforms the interior from a sporty cabin into something almost practical, giving owners a flat load area that could carry luggage, guitars, toolboxes, whatever your life required. The 67's interior has this mixture of sportiness and maturity that later Mustangs sometimes lost. The dials are large and clear, framed by metal rings. The steering wheel feels robust. The optional wood grain trim tries to inject a little sophistication into the otherwise purposeful cockpit. It's not luxurious in any modern sense, but it feels authentic, built during a time when even performance cars needed to look like they belonged in everyday life.